Welcome to episode 186 of Your Career Podcast. Happy New Year! It's 2020 and this is the first podcast of the year. I'm wishing you much success, good health, happiness, and lots of family time in the new year. So, welcome to Your Career Podcast. Each week I provide valuable career development advice or fascinating interviews with professionals who have made amazing career changes. In today's rapidly changing world of work, managing your career has become more and more difficult. So how do you stay relevant? How do you keep your skills up to date? What skills will remain in demand, and how can you land your dream job in this digital world in which the recruitment process is constantly evolving? For support to manage your career, the Careers Academy online is where I provide all the support you need. There are career management resources, personal branding and LinkedIn programs for you, together with confidence building programs, resume writing masterclasses, and much, much more. You can join my monthly group career coaching sessions, plus have a one-on-one coaching session with me. Visit www.thecareersacademy.online for all you need to take control of your career. Find the links in my show notes at janejacksoncoach.com/podcast 2. I can't wait to see you on the inside. Today, I am delighted to interview a very special man whom I met through the Key Person of Influence Business Accelerator program. He is a generous, warm-hearted individual, and I'm very happy to have him on the show today. Anfernee Chansamooth is a content strategist, copywriter, and speaker. He's the co-founder of Founders Connect and the Remote Business Summit, along with his wife Cindy Pham. Together, they're on a mission to help entrepreneurs and leaders to launch, grow, and optimize their remote teams so that they can enjoy true freedom. They're also co-hosts of the Founders Connect podcast, found on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and Spotify. Let's find out how Anfernee made the successful career transition from senior project management at Hewlett-Packard to marketing and then entrepreneurship. And so let's welcome Anfernee to the show. Hi, Anfernee.
Hi, Jane. How are you?
I'm really well. And so lovely to be talking to you because I know that you're in Bali at the moment and lots of exciting things happening for you and your business. And I'm over here in Sydney and it's very dark now. It's about 8 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. But very exciting to hear all about what you're doing and also your career journey. Now, as you know, Anfernee, this career podcast is all about career transitions and developing resilience. And you are one of the most resilient people I know who knows how to reinvent his career. So how about, just to kick us off, tell us, what were your early career aspirations as a little boy?
So this is a great question. I was quite excited to hear that you're going to ask this question because no one's really asked me this. And when I was in school, interestingly enough, I wanted to be a business person. Now, I don't know why that was the case, but my parents definitely weren't that. They had traditional blue-collar jobs and came up in that world. And then when I went to school, I remember I think it was grade 8, we were pulled into the career advisor's room and then, we're asked promptly, what do you want to do when you graduate high school? And I honestly had no idea. And so he gave me 24 hours to go home, do some research, whatever that looked like, and then come back to him the next day and tell him something. And that's what I did. So I went home and I was playing a lot of Commodore 64 games and Atari games and things like this. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be a programmer. I'll create games. How about that? And so I went back to the advisor and said, yes, that's what I want to be. I want to be a gamer, game software person. I didn't even know what they were called back then. And he said, great, so you're going to have to study physics and chemistry. So they're going to be your electives next year when you go into grade 9. And the interesting story from that was I failed chemistry and I barely passed physics. And then realized somewhere along the way that I actually had a knack for literature and related English, which is what I studied in the senior levels of school. And I loved Hamlet and getting into, this linguistics and how to, write and storytelling and all these sort of different things that we learnt. Poetry, we studied some of the great Australian poets. And that kind of was my first foray into the world of the arts, right? So when I went to university, I actually signed up for a double degree, an arts major and a science major. Both. It was a double degree 5-year program. I lasted 1 year in arts and then was promptly told by everyone around me, hey, you're never going to get a job in arts. Like, you can't be a writer making any money, so you might as well go do the computer science thing. And that's what I did. And that's how I developed my skill set in IT and really kind of that's where it leads to where I am today. And we can talk about that.
No wonder, because in your early days, your early jobs was with HP in IT as a project manager. And I was wondering, that's a big change. So from wanting to be a gamer, which obviously didn't work, not enjoying chemistry or physics, and then following your heart, which was really the humanities with language and literature, and then going back into the science side, it must have been a bit confusing for you in the early days.
Absolutely. And what I discovered throughout my university, but also my early years at HP. So when I graduated, I actually worked for AOL for a time when they were still around. And then TPG, which has now become a mammoth company in Australia. And then went from call centers to call center and ended up at HP. And it was there that I realized very quickly, within 12 months, I was promoted from a call center operator to the team leader, and I managed a team of 10 staff in New South Wales, and then became one of the project managers who managed global teams. So I had Asia Pacific, and then I worked with some people in Costa Rica and also in the US. And I learned along the way that what came naturally to me was the ability to connect with people and to lead people and to inspire them and motivate them and really look at what was, and to train them. I had just a knack for picking up concepts and then being able to deliver them in a way that people would understand them. And I had tremendous pride from seeing people that I would train, pick up a skill or to be able to do a task. And that's why when I applied to become the team manager, I was actually head to head against someone who'd been in a team much more longer than I had been. And they gave me the nod because they said, you just have this ability to talk to people and connect and find out what motivates them. And we want a leader. We don't want just someone with technical ability. And so that's kind of how I moved up the ranks in terms of where I was in HP.
Because you exude a lot of warmth and you're so friendly. And, like when I first met you and started talking to you, it's like, oh, he's such a nice man.
Thank you.
And very fun. It's just you exude joy. That's what. So, and I think that's why you always have a big smile on your face, and it's like you want to get to know people, which is so lovely. And so, how did the changes happen? Because you are like a multiple entrepreneur, and you're a content creator, you're a content strategist now. It's such a big change from those early days. And so, what prompted you to leave corporate?
Right. So the interesting thing was, whilst I was in corporate, I took a leadership role. Loved the training aspect. I love actually developing training programs. I loved, I was put in charge of creating a reward and recognition initiative for our department. And I did that and I won an award for that. And so I kind of knew, hey, this is something that, if I were to leave corporate, that's where I could pursue potentially. And to answer the question, why I left corporate, because it got to a point where we were offshoring back in 2013 or something like that. We were offshoring a lot of our work to India and to low-cost centers around the world. And so I was basically given a choice. I could leave the company at that point in time, or I could stay on as a project manager and go over and essentially, first of all, I had to fire my team. So the 10 people were under me, I had to actually let them go, which is never a fun experience. And then I had to go over to India and train the new people who were taking over the people that I had let go. So this was a lot of mixed emotions. I also took it on as an opportunity because it was like, hey, this thing is happening right now, and I can go and learn all about different cultures and how do you work with new cultures. And it's interesting now because fast forward to 2019 where we are now, and this has become standard. Like you're outsourcing to people in the Philippines, you're outsourcing to people all over the place, and it's just a way of life now. But back then it was quite new. Yeah. And so I then left when I got a transfer from Sydney to Toronto during that time period, and they basically gave me the opportunity to go and work in the Toronto office. And then within 8 months, I was made redundant because they started letting go of all their project managers in our department, right? And that's when I was given this really interesting situation where it's kind of like, well, I had this visa which is tied to HP, and I'm not allowed to work for anyone else. Like the Canadian government, basically immigration was saying you cannot work for anyone else because you're being sponsored by that company. But I still had, I think, like 12 months left on the visa, and I didn't want to go home to Australia yet. So I thought, okay, well, what do I do? And one of my housemates at the time said, well, you've been doing this like volunteer salsa teaching thing at the church every Saturday.
Salsa teaching?
Yes.
I didn't know about that, Anfernee.
And so I picked up that habit like when I went over there, and I said, okay, let's give it a go. And there was this website at the time, which is huge now, but back then it was kind of starting up. It was called meetup.com. And I listed an event, for beginner salsa classes. We ran them out of our living room, and people it was within 2 weeks we had 200 new members. And I posted an event saying, "Hey, why don't you come over to this venue?" Didn't say it's my house, and we'll pay what you can. I'll put a hat out, and talking about hats, here you go. So I put a hat out like that and say, put whatever you want in here, and you'll get a class for an hour. And that was my first entry into the world of entrepreneurship. Right? Didn't know it at the time, but that's what it was. And then
what a brilliant way to begin, by doing something that you really enjoy.
Absolutely. And this is a valuable lesson about passion, like following a passion and turning that into business, because over time I did that for about a year and a half, and I was actually invited to teach within organizations. So they would have their staff come into classes I would run for 8 or 12-week work programs. And then I realized, well, this is a lot of work, and it's actually kind of taking the joy out of like my passion. I love to dance, to teach, but this was just not what I thought it would be. And I actually, during that stint, was training to be a ballroom instructor. So I went through learning 8 different styles, both lead and follower steps, and 3 different movements for 8 different styles across the period of like 2 months. And my brain was fried. Like it was just so much. And not only that was just learning how to dance. And then on top of that was learning how to sell, because the role of the instructor is also to sell people into programs, right? And I didn't love that part of it, because I felt I wasn't really giving value to the students, and I was pressurizing them to sell when I just wanted to teach. Like that's really
I think it takes the joy out of it when you have to really sell, and yes. And it really, when it's hard sales, it's very different from like marketing. But if someone's enjoying the process, then they naturally become customers anyway, which is Absolutely. A lovely thing. But then if you've got KPIs to meet and you have to sign up a certain number of people, suddenly the pressure, and it ends up being a bit of a sweaty palm exercise. It's like, what if they don't sign up? What if I don't meet my KPIs? Yes. So that I guess took the shine out of it a little bit. But well, so far this shows that you are very adaptable. And so it's a bit like when life brings you lemons. So, without offshoring and outsourcing, it's part and parcel of corporate life. It just happens. Yes. And especially when it comes to call centers, because they will be, every call center will be outsourced somewhere. And then if it works well, good for them. But if not, then they insource again. So it's a bit like a cycle. But how lovely to have had that opportunity to work in Toronto as well, yes. and to launch your entrepreneurial venture. Yes. And so when the shine became a little bit dim when it came to dancing, yes. What did you do next? So
whilst I was doing the dancing, I was also, that was only a couple of days a week. The rest of my time, I was actually getting into learning how to use Twitter and Facebook, which were the big social media platforms at the time, and still are to some degree. And then I ended up volunteering for a social enterprise in Toronto, and pitched to them, hey, I can actually help you guys out with your social media strategy and implementing, getting people to come to your events and these sort of things. Prior to that, I had also studied NLP. So back in Sydney, when I was still in corporate, I did some NLP certification training. And so and they loved that, because they were these young graduates coming out of uni, and they were saying, oh, we would love to have someone who could understand psychology, who could actually, work with some of our, young people to actually work on their mindsets. And because it was called the Young Social Entrepreneurs of Canada, and they were all about, their mission were to empower young social entrepreneurs, and to create really, good businesses, in the country, and work with young people to do that. So we ran a ton of events, and they saw that value, and they said, well, why don't you come in, help us with the social media, but also, help us coach even our leaders within the team, because some of them need some help with that area. So and that led to actually my first ever client in the social media world, in the marketing world, which was a random event that I went to. A friend of mine on the team was meant to go on this cruise. She couldn't go, so she said, Anf, why don't you come along to this cruise on my behalf? And I went, and I met the guy who was doing the sound for the cruise, and he ended up being a guy who had his own web development company for 10 years, and he said, we need someone to come in and consult our clients on how to do social media. And so that kind of led to me doing consulting work, and really utilizing the skills I had developed whilst volunteering.
The power of the network. How interesting. Yes. And so now this is when you were still in Canada. And so you had that problem where if you were leaving HP, and then you had to have the visa and be sponsored by the company, but then you went into, your different entrepreneurial ventures. How did you manage that? How did you manage the visa status?
So it was kind of like, I basically had a registered business, or an ABN, in Australia. I kind of made that happen. I had a trip come back to Australia. Long story, but essentially my mother passed away in 2009, so I had to come back to Sydney. And during that time, I basically registered an ABN and went back, and then operated as an Australian business in Canada, which meant I didn't have I wasn't violating the Canadian visa laws, because I wasn't there. If I was to go into Canada as an entrepreneur or a business, I'd have to pay something ridiculous, like, $1 million or something like that, which I obviously didn't have at the time. And so I just basically freelanced my way through, and that was able to pay my rent, and I was able to stick around for that year.
That just shows how enterprising you are. Because this is the thing, if you're going to go into entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurs have to dance in the moment so often. And, if something isn't quite working the way you want it to, you have to make it happen as well. It sounds like you really make things happen for yourself. And once you got into that, and with the social media and the training and the digital marketing, that's really the path that you have followed now for quite a number of years.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So I started running workshops as part of the team I was on, and that's kind of when I look back, I did an exercise with them, led by a career coach, much like yourself, and I will always remember the exercise, because what they did was to look back, basically say, hey, look back at your career to date, and what has been the consistent, skill or interest or passion that has been there the whole time that you maybe hadn't identified. And it was like a light bulb. For me, it was, wow, I just love to teach. Whatever it is, doing workshops, speaking on a stage, right? Podcasting, whatever it is now, that's just a form of teaching for me. And, I love to research and learn at the same time. And that was the consistent thread. So, we fast forward to coming back to Sydney and to Australia. I launched a Facebook ad agency with a co-founder or a partner. And we ran that for a couple of years and built a bit of a brand for ourselves in Sydney. And then we part ways. But that whole time, we were just delivering. My partner was delivering the service, but I was the one going out and actually doing all the talks and educating entrepreneurs and small businesses on how to use Facebook. So that was me kind of stepping into my genius, if you will, and then him doing what he does best. So that was a nice partnership.
Oh, fantastic. And then fast forward a couple of years, you set up an amazing business called Simple Creative Marketing. And that's where you are now the incredible content strategist. Yes. So it's digital marketing, it's copywriting, and you really create some incredible copy that enables people to really showcase their skill sets on their websites and, various content. Yes.
Yes. So, my clients essentially hire me to wordsmith a lot of their ideas and concepts and take it out of. So a lot of these people are technical. So whether I'm working with an accounting firm, for example, another was a project manager in IT, and they basically have this belief, and I don't agree with them, but their belief is that they're not creative, and it's just not in the way that they just simply say, well, it's very difficult to market my services, and I'm very good at sitting down with someone and just unpacking or their like I have the technical understanding, because I have come from the IT world and the project management world, but I just sit down with someone like this and I just say, okay, well, tell me all about, your expertise. And then I'll ask questions using my coaching skills to ask questions to pull out the relevant insights that their audiences might want, and removing a lot of technical jargon because people don't want to hear or the P&L and all these things that, we want to hear it, but not in those words necessarily. So that's kind of the craft. And as I ran a copywriting workshop the other night, and the key takeaway I gave to the participants was, the best copywriters and the best marketers are actually the best researchers. And the more time they spend on researching and listening to the people, the better the marketing will be, because it's all about communication and messaging.
Yeah. And you have to be able to tell the story, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So what would you say are your top tips for someone who wishes to be a copywriter?
Yeah. So I would say, really learn two things. One is to, first thing you need to practice. Like I've been blogging since 2009. And started with a personal blog, didn't even know what a blog was at the time, and just wrote. And it was almost a cathartic, therapy for myself, and just to get my ideas out, my thoughts and feelings. During that career transition, I had another reason why I left corporate, which I didn't mention, was I actually had a brain surgery in 2006. And that was, I was overworked and there's a lot of stress happening at that time. And I was writing as a way to release a lot of that and to deal with it, right? And then I realized along the way, and this is a tip in terms of copywriting, is you need to write for an audience. So you need to think about, well, who the audience is. If it's going to be a client, for example, then you need to understand, well, who are they trying to communicate with, and then what's the motivations and what's the desires of that particular audience, and then how to marry that with what service or product the business provides, right? And so then now you're not just writing, but you're writing, applying some key principles around storytelling, and then applying that to a specific audience in mind, right? So, and that's where tip number 2 would be research. That's where the research comes in, and the more time you actually spend with not only the client but also the client's clients, right? So I actually, as part of my process, would interview 5 or 10 of their clients or people in their demographic or target audience, to really understand, well, what is it you actually desire, what do you want, and what are your challenges. And a lot of the times these particular customers don't communicate it directly to the business owner. Okay. And it's for whatever reason, it's because maybe they feel like, because you're trying to sell something to me, I don't want to give you the whole truth. Right. And so, but I'm willing to give it to a third party, right. In the name of, research or whatever it may be. And I'm transparent. I will say, look, I'm doing this on behalf of the client, of the business. Right. But I just want to give them honest feedback as well to improve their business as well. So that's how we do it.
Yeah, so you really get into the psyche of the customer as well as the client as well. And Anfernee, you're telling me this story about copywriting, and you just throw in this little snippet of, oh, and by the way, I had brain surgery. I mean, Anfernee, that's huge. Oh my goodness! So the recovery would have taken a long time, and you're like, oh yeah. So I got over brain surgery by journaling, and then you carry on. Honestly, but this just shows again your resilience. And whatever life throws at you, you'd somehow turn it around into a positive. And, you've always got the big smile on your face, and you're just a happy, really approachable, likable guy.
Now,
Amazing.
I won't take. Thank you, Jane. I won't take full credit for that. I had a very strong support network. My parents are amazing. My family, my friends, and certainly in that entrepreneurship world, as you would understand, that's critical. You need to have people like yourself and people who can relate to you. It's lonely being a copywriter. Like you literally just you and your keyboard, or if you're writing on paper, it's a lot of work. But I make a great effort to actually connect with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, for so many people, when they do run their own businesses, especially when you're starting out and you might be a one-man band, it does get lonely. This is one of the things people don't realize. Everyone's always hankering after having their own business, and wouldn't it be wonderful? I have all this time freedom, I have unlimited earnings potential, and they paint this rosy picture. Well, in actual fact, it's just a lot of hard work. But
Absolutely.
If it's what you love, it doesn't actually matter, because I love what I do, and if I'm working till midnight, it's my business. Of course, I'm going to enjoy it, right? And you work, as long and as hard as you like, but it's always for your passion, and I think that's so important. And if it benefits the community, or benefits someone, or benefits an organization, then it truly feels rewarding. And being able to craft those words is really interesting. Now, you organize an awful lot of stuff. There's always something going on with you, Anfernee. I mean, you've done this. There was this Warrior Women Mastermind in Laos that you organized, which sounds amazing. And this was really a charitable event too, because you were raising funds to help the children in Laos.
Right.
And so, what else are you working on now?
So that was I'm still call it a social entrepreneur, if you will. I'm driven by purpose, and I'm driven by doing projects that relate to what's happening in society. So my current project is called Remote Business Summit. And it actually, I'm glad we talked about the isolation that comes with entrepreneurship, because what we're observing now is a shift into remote work, and remote working and outsourcing and working with people in different locations. A lot of us would have heard about the digital nomad movement and people and freelancing and these sort of things. But what comes with that are a whole, array of challenges, right? And one of those, so basically the summit is bringing together 25 experts in remote work. And these are people who have built remote teams, anything from 10 to 200 staff that are working remotely, and them sharing their insights around, well, what do you need to do in order to build a company that actually can do that? So as a leader, what do you need to take care of as a leader? And then what systems you need to put in place, what practices do you need to consider in terms of like HR or hiring and recruiting and these sort of things, and obviously systems and tools. So we're all about now. The mission for it is actually why my wife Cindy and I we created Founders Connect. Was all about actually helping entrepreneurs to address some of these challenges of growing a global business, but also the challenges you have on a personal level. So we, as I got married a couple of years ago now with Cindy, we, went into the world of entrepreneurship. She kind of came with me and then learnt, okay, we need to navigate how do you, build a successful marriage, but also build a successful business. And these things always sometimes at conflict, right? So this summit is basically, we're looking at the technical aspects, we're looking at the people aspects, but we're definitely also looking at the human aspect, which is, okay, how do you deal with isolation? How do you deal with, if you're going to be nomadic, right? How do you deal with moving around all the time and being able to work effectively? How do you deal with your mental? So one of my favorite topics on the summit is the mental wellness for leaders and remote workers, because that's a massive, massive issue that I'm seeing, and not just myself, but everyone I've spoken to has said, yes, I've had some kind of depression or anxiety or some kind of issue with working remotely. And whether it's me
because of the isolation, Anfernee?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, it's one example is a mother who works from home and is afforded the ability to do that because of remote work, but she's it's great because she can be at home with the kids and the family, but sometimes she just needs a break from the kids and the family, and so she needs the community, right? So where do you go in that regard, right? Or if it's the digital nomad who's moving from one country to another all the time, every few months, then it's very hard to set roots and actually build strong relationships, because you're just ships passing by at night. And so that's a challenge that comes up, right? So these are a few of the things that we will be talking about.
Yeah, what a valuable summit that will be, the Remote Business Summit, because, so many people think, oh, how wonderful to work remotely, and, how nice to be the laptop entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
and it's not really lying on a beach with your laptop all the time. There are all these other challenges too. And, ensuring that you get paid, for what you do, and how you're going to structure your business, and how much do you charge. And then all of the things that any entrepreneur who would be, on the ground in this one spot would experience, but not having the support network really makes it quite hard. So this is going to be an excellent networking event as well as educational event. And where will this be held? Well, it'll be held remotely, I suppose.
Correct. So this is a completely online virtual event. It will run for 2 days. From November 18 to 22. So it's 5 days, 25 speakers. And then we're in discussions with some of the partners at potentially doing a, in-person live event at some stage. But we're far from that. This is the first time we executed this particular event. So let's see how that goes first.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. That sounds so interesting. And where do people go if they want to find out all about this summit?
Right. So the website for the summit is www.remotebusinesssummit, and it's free tickets for everyone who wants to register, so they can jump in on that. The event kicks off on November 18.
Summit, and you're offering so remotebusinesssummit.com.
Correct.
.com. Okay, and you're offering it for free for participants.
Yes. So it's like a big part of this is actually raising awareness around remote companies and remote work. So whether you are someone who is building a remote company and want to, build remote teams, or you're someone who's on the other side and you want to be a freelancer, or you want to get a job in that world, then we're sort of catering to both, and we have people who can speak about those different worlds and how they interact, right? So it really is an exercise in awareness, and this is something that's predicted by in the next 5 years that 50% of the population certainly in the US will be remote workers, and that trend, I don't see that being any different in Australia or in the UK or anywhere else, because I think we're in the world of outsourcing and offshoring in a big way, and big companies. Name any big company you want, in Australia, and 100%, I'm telling you, they've already globalized their company and already doing this. Yeah.
You know what's interesting is even on LinkedIn, in the job section, you don't have to choose a city or a country anymore. You can choose remote as an option, and there are so many businesses now that are actually very happy. Even like the big consulting firms, the big accounting firms, they're very happy to have remote workers as well. And with my own private coaching practice, I've structured it such that I do work remotely most of the time. I'm working from home, and like we're using today, Zoom, this is how I coach my clients, and how I can have group coaching sessions as well as one-on-one coaching sessions. And I love technology so much that I find it's an enabler. And I think also it ends up being a bit of a level playing field, doesn't it, Anfernee? Because it doesn't matter race, religion, age, demographic, even your state of health, unless you can't talk or you can't type, you can still do something. You can still provide a service somehow. And I think it certainly is enabling so many people to be able to earn an income, to create their own business. And this is fantastic for freelancers too.
Absolutely. There's so many benefits to it. There's one of the arguments that comes up with remote work is, particularly from managers or hiring managers and companies, are, how do we know that the person on the other end is actually going to do the work? And the thing with remote work is, you kind of do know, because they have to submit the work to you. You'll see it, like if it's done or not done, right? And there's been a ton of research which indicates just because someone's sitting in the same office with you, it doesn't mean productivity is any better or whatever it may be, right? So, we can jam on all about that, but there's definitely this is the future. It's happening now, and whether you like it or not, it's over the next 5 to 10 years, we will be fully remote. Remote companies are just what it's going to be. There's so many benefits, cost benefits. There's going to be like you can hire, and I'm sure you've had this experience, you can hire great talent and people with amazing skills and abilities at a lower cost, right, in a different location. And does, what it does, I hear people like graphic designers and copywriters say, oh, but that's terrible because I'll lose my clients and things like that. And I say, no, what it does, it forces you to improve your game. It actually forces you to look at, well, how do you do better or provide something different so that you stand out. And so, you can sort of cry and go, oh, that's terrible. Like, this was happening in 2003 when we were outsourcing at the beginning. I remember this. Companies were saying this. And then what we learned was actually what it does. We haven't even talked about, Jane, we haven't talked about AI yet. AI, technology that's come in that will replace humans. That's a whole different conversation. And that's happening in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, automation, there are so many people who are worried about, will robots take my job? But there are many, many skill sets that cannot be automated. And I think the way of the future is you have to make sure that your soft skills, your people skills, your leadership skills are really top notch, because you can't replicate that. I mean, you can to a certain extent, but that real human element will still have to be delivered by a human. Whereas if it's going to be simple administrative tasks, things like that, you can have the chatbots, to take care of an awful lot as well of customer service. So it's not just outsourcing call centers; it's sort of outsourcing the receptionist in a way. And it definitely is the way of the future, isn't it?
Yeah, it frees up our ability as humans to be more creative and to do things like you say, connect and empathize and tell amazing stories and become more human. So whilst the trend from a tech, on one trend that we're observing is, yes, there's a rise of remote working and freelancing and that economy. The other trend that's happening, as you would be well aware, is the rise of co-working, right? And shared spaces and people coming together to collaborate. And there's actually a movement happening right now, which is the makers are coming into, like they're having a revolution where, everything's all about organic, all the things about slow food and slow cooking and, how to make things with your hand. So what's happening is we're actually kind of like returning back to, the times of villages and connecting on that level, because, and that's actually where the opportunity is, right? So, like I'm looking at, well, what's the next evolution of my career? Because I know that at, the level of artificial intelligence in terms of copywriting is already almost at a stage where it's going to replace what I do for a living, right? So I'm already looking at, well, what's next? Because I need to upskill and make sure I'm ready for that iteration.
Yeah, I noticed like even for writing, there are so many tools that can assist you, like Grammarly and Hemingway, if you're not quite sure about your syntax and all that sort of thing. But also, I was just thinking back to managers who have to lead remote teams. That's really hard. So you as a project manager back in the day, I guess there must be many tools like Asana and Bootcamp or whatever that you would recommend that leaders could use in order to really monitor what their team are doing as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned we're using Asana for our own team and for running the summit. One of my clients is using Reich. There's a ton of project management systems you can use. The biggest part of it to me is you need to mirror and marry the system or the tool and the tool sets that you're using with the culture. And that's a big piece which, a tool cannot create. That's something where as humans, we need to sit together, and speak with each other and work out, okay, well, what is the culture of our company? What is the ethos? What makes it what it is? And it's actually, you start off with the leaders doing that, but, this is one of the topics we'll definitely be talking about on the summit. But when a company is growing and you get, your first VA or you get, you start building people into a team, everyone has an input into what that culture becomes, right? And then there's actually a transition, if you will, of the leader actually letting go of what they think the culture is. Like they might have a vision as to where the company is going, and that's certainly their role of the CEO. But what naturally happens, and a good example of this is Zappos. So if you actually go and read Tony Hsieh's book about the Zappos journey, they've got a whole program on how to do that, and they basically have just one of the biggest. I mean, Amazon went to them for consulting on how to build culture because it's just a tremendous story on how they did it.
That's interesting. Zappos. Okay,
Yes.
that's something that we can recommend as well in the show notes. Now,
Yes.
Anfernee, we could talk all day, all night, because there's so much to be covered when it comes to remote work, and it's not as simple as one thinks, because once you start doing it, it opens up a whole can of worms as well. But it certainly is the way of the future, and I think people would be very smart if they want to future-proof their careers, to be very aware of the remote work summit and all the learning that they would get from it. And so, Anfernee, are you going to leave us with a few final words? Because I will be putting all of your links in the show notes in janejacksoncoach.com, so you can just go over there and click and find Anfernee and the remote work summit if you want to do that with ease.
Sure.
But final words, Anfernee?
I'm going to go back to the title of your book, which is all about navigating crossroads and actually, understanding and appreciating that the journey is an evolving one, and where you feel wherever you are today in your career, due to the way the world is moving and technology is moving, there's a good chance that you'll have to adjust and flow with it, and we can try and hold on to something, an idea, a concept, an identity of who we are, but inevitably, right? The universe, or whatever you want to call it, life will push you and give you opportunities to grow as a human being, and that's really what it's all about.
And the only constant is change.
Love it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for your time tonight, Anfernee. Really appreciate it. Anfernee, not Anthony. It's a beautiful name, Anfernee. Does it mean something?
Yes, it actually means little warrior. It's an American Indian name.
Ah, little warrior. I like that.
But I'm not so little anymore.
No,
I'm 6'1".
You're the big warrior now. And thank you again so much for your time, Anfernee. And I look forward to finding out how everything went with the Remote Work Summit.
It's an honor, and I look forward to hearing more about your launches and your training programs. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks so much. Bye now. You've been listening to Your Career Podcast with Jane Jackson. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes. I'll love you for it. And as promised, here's the link to your free job search guide. Go to www.thecareersacademy.online/free job search guide. Too easy. Or go to my show notes and the link will be there. So hop over to janejacksoncoach.com/podcast. And remember, until next time, believe in yourself and create magic.